Am I back? Okay, I don't know if I just hit a wrong button. We had a camera malfunction. Have I got everybody back or not? I'm not seeing anyone. There we go. Sarah's back. I'm gonna wait for everybody to come back in. Who else is back? I see somebody else back. Danya is back, I think. We had a little electronic malfunction there. All I'm seeing is, oh, Judy's back. Okay, there we go. Danya's back. Here we go. Now it's coming back. Give people a chance to get back in here. Danya, I see you. Yes, I don't see you, but I see your picture. Okay, Mary's back, I think. Sorry, we had an electronic malfunction here. We had to restart, so I'm waiting for everybody to get back in here. Give a few seconds here for people to get back in. So, Mary, you were asking me who that was, and that was Mighty Fortress, of course. It's arranged by, and I'll probably butcher this name because I think it's probably either Swedish or Norwegian, uh, Vaclav Nehabil, and the organ is by Diane Bish, Bish, and that was the Dallas Brass Live in Concert. And so it's on YouTube under if you go in and type "Mighty Fortress is our God," and you know what? I'll just have Sarah, because Sarah is the one who sent it to me. I'll just have Sarah send it to you, so she'll send you the link to that piece from YouTube. So my thought was is that we'd have a little bit of mood music in the evening before the class starts, and so if you have find a piece that's really good, feel free to send it to me via the internet, and I'll play it as we wait for people to get in. Unfortunately, I think some of the people are still floundering out there from my electronic snafu. So I want to just give a couple more minutes here for people to get back into the class. I only see it right now. We only have 9 people in, and I'm hoping that people will figure out how to get back in to the class here, because it stopped recording and then I had to go back in and start it again. So such is life in the world of cyberspace for Bible study, huh? Up there's let's see, Bonnie's back in. Okay, Judy's there. Okay, Dave's there. So I think maybe I think that was mostly everybody who got bumped out. I think is back in now. So okay, so we're here, lesson 4 of the book of Job this week. We're going to be doing a little bit of study of up to where we've gotten to this point, and then we'll try to get into a little bit of chapter 16 and 17 this week. The assigned reading was 16 through 21, but I'm pretty sure we won't get into 19 and 21 because 19 is a really important chapter, and I want to be able to have plenty of time to talk about that next week. So, but we'll do what we can. Let's open with prayer. Lord Jesus, we give you thanks for giving us this time together in your word, and we ask you, Lord, that you would be with us, that you would open our hearts, and that you'd open our minds, so that we might hear what you have to say to us, and that we might be able to use it. So, Let's see. Last week, that's where I wanted to start. I got distracted because I see David Stalky came in. I'm very excited. Hello, David. Good to see you, buddy. Um, so last week, somebody had a question for me, and I got it later after class, and that person said that they're troubled by people who say every time something bad happens to them or something bad happens, they say, "Well, that's just God's will," you know, as though we have our choices in life, our decisions have no bearing on anything. It's just God's will. That's just the way it is. Um, and I understand that frustration. I understand how that can seem like a cop out. That I can do whatever I want, make whatever stupid choices I want in life, and then I can just blame God's will for it when things fall apart. So first of all, let's talk about God's will. Remember that there's a significant difference between God's will and God's foreknowledge. Okay, and I was just reading in Mere Christianity today. Fantastic book, by the way. I'm doing C.S. Lewis for my independent study, so I'm reading Abolition of Man, God in the Dock, Mere Christianity, Screwtape Letters, The Great Divorce, Problem with Pain, a couple of autobiographies, a lot of Lewis. So I'm doing about 3,000 pages of reading in Lewis over the last couple of months and proceeding on to the next couple of months. So I was just going through Mere Christianity for about the third time that I've been through Mere Christianity, and it struck me that one of the things that he talks about in there is exactly what we're going to talk about now. We think of time, right, as linear. You know, we do this, and then this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens. Okay, and that's the only way we can think of time, right? Because that's the way we're created. We're created to be linear thinkers. We're created to be bound by space and time. Okay, and if you take space and time away from us, we can go crazy. LSD psychosis used to be a very common, and unfortunately is now becoming more common again, LSD-induced psychosis. What happens is LSD, the drug, chemically, and this is in layman's terms, and I'm sure that Sarah Bilodeau will be cringing right now as I say this, because whenever I talk chemistry, it's like nails on a chalkboard for her. But LSD is a chemical that sort of melts down the walls in our brain, so that things are things that we know what they are we don't have those reference points anymore. So why do we know that a circle is a circle? We know that a circle is a circle because somewhere in our life we've been told this is what a circle is. Okay, but what if you didn't have that reference? What if you every time you looked at a circle you had no frame of reference as to what it was or what to call it? And that's what LSD does. It melts down. It's like if you think of your brain as a massive filing cabinet, it melts down all the filing drawers, and your files are just all over the floor. Okay, and you have no way of referencing anything. On the one hand, it promotes great creativity because artists and photographers and people like that love it because they see things in ways that they had not seen before, because they had always experienced everything from in their frame of reference. Okay, but on the other hand, what if those walls never come back? And that's the problem with LSD. With some people, sometimes the walls don't come back, and that's called LSD-induced psychosis. Okay, and the problem is unpredictable. See, you don't know, number one, if you are a person who's susceptible to this. Number two, you don't know when you're susceptible to it, because there are people who have dropped acid 1,000 times, but on the 1,001st time, suddenly they have LSD-induced psychosis, and sometimes they can't get you back. Sometimes you're gone for good. Okay, and so one of the things that for us, the way we function is in our brains, we have everything boxed in by space and time. Okay, everything's in space and time. And so it's very difficult for us to talk about God's foreknowledge because we are so boxed in by space and time. God is not. So God envisions everything at once. So if you take a piece of paper and you say, okay, here's my life, and you draw a line on that paper, that's your life. But God sees the whole page. See, so there is no now for God as opposed to then or not yet. God sees it all, everything. And so when because people will say things like, well, if God loves me and he knew that that I was going to get in a wreck on I-55 at 7 o'clock in the morning, why didn't he do something? Okay, but see, that's not how God exists. God doesn't exist saying, oh yeah, tomorrow at 7 o'clock I got to do something. God sees the whole page. He knows how everything's going to work out. He knows what's going to happen, and what he promises in Romans 8 is that he will turn everything for our good. So that's what we hang on to, is the fact that not that, oh, God should have done this or God should have done that, but that God knows what's going to happen. Okay, that's why I can live my life with no fear of death. I have no fear of death because I already know that it's going to happen when it's going to happen. God already knows what's going to happen, and all I have to do is focus on serving him. That's the only thing that matters. As long as I'm serving him, I'm going to have joy and peace and contentment in my life. And I don't have to worry. I don't have to think about, oh, when will I die? Or when might I die? Or how might I die? It's not on the register for me. It doesn't matter. Because I already know that somewhere on that page is my death. Okay? When it is, I don't know. How it is, who knows? And who cares, really? Because death is just a transition from this life to paradise. So who cares? Which is, by the way, a little teaser for the sermon. It's what we're going to talk about on Sunday during the sermon. Okay, so God's will and God's foreknowledge. We know what God wills, right? God wills that all men be saved. We know that God wills that we worship him first and foremost. We know that God wills that his name be hallowed. Okay? We also know that we're not bound to God's will. Okay? That he gives us free will. So we don't have to worship him if we don't want to. We don't have to obey authority if we don't want to. We don't have to care for our neighbor if we don't want to. Because God gives us that free will. God's will is never evil. It's always good, never evil. Okay, now, here's another thing. What we think of as good and evil, remember, I know that everybody thinks they know what's good and what's evil. Everybody thinks that. Even if you say you don't, somewhere in the back of your mind, you harbor this little, voice in the back of your head saying, well, yeah, but I know that's bad, or I know that's good. Okay? But you don't, right? Because all you can see is a little dot on that page, where you are right now. You can try to imagine what might happen here, and you can try to remember what happened here. But really, that's it. You're one little dot in the whole page. That's all you are. Okay? God sees the whole page, right? So what we imagine as good and evil, we don't know if it's good or evil, except for what God tells us. Okay? We know when God tells us this is good, this is evil. Okay? Then we know, okay, that's good and evil. But let's say a hurricane in Pensacola. Is that good or bad? Well, people who have to live through it would say it's bad, right? But 100 years from now, maybe we'll find out that hurricane deposited a lot of sand on the beach that was necessary for the success of the people who lived there in 100 years. See, God sees that. God knows what's really good and what's really bad. We don't. Just like a child, a child thinks that you're evil if you tell him that he can't have ice cream instead of dinner. Okay? And none of us, none of us like to think of ourselves as children, but let's face it. Compared to God, we're toddlers. Okay? God sees it all. We see one little dot. So God says no, we think, well, that's evil. That's terrible. He should let us have ice cream. Okay? Just like toddlers look at adults in the same way. We can't always understand what God's doing. We can't understand that things that he's doing might not have an effect in our world for a millennia. We have no idea. But he sees the whole page. It's all there for him. Okay? He promises to turn all things for our good. And that's what we have to trust in. Sometimes God allows us to experience consequences, okay, for our good. because he's always teaching. And so that's why I encourage people who are going through difficult times, stop asking why me. Okay, why me is a useless, irrelevant question. Okay? It doesn't matter. You can't answer it because you're not God, and it doesn't matter why you. Why not you? You know, why not you? So instead of asking why me, ask what is God teaching, knowing that He's promising always to be teaching us. He's always showing us things. Ask, what is God teaching? And so that's where God was moving Job. We will see Him move Job to that, because Job comes to that point of trying to seek, what God is teaching him, instead of just moaning and complaining about everything that's wrong. And we don't take it lightly. Job had a lot to moan and complain about, if anybody did. But nevertheless, why me is a useless and irrelevant question. Sometimes God allows us to go through very difficult times because that's what we need. Job can't understand what he had done to deserve such consequences, and that's a word that is a misplaced word. You get what you deserve? No, okay, no. If we got what we deserved, we'd all be damned to hell. That's what we deserve, okay, because we're all sinful, corrupt human beings. So we deserve to be damned to hell. So get that word out of your vocabulary when it comes to God. We don't get what we deserve. We never get what we deserve. And Job was struggling with, well, I don't deserve this because I haven't done anything. And for those things that I have done, I've made all the appropriate sacrifices. I've kept the rules. Bottom line, Job maybe didn't do anything. He might not have done anything to deserve any of what happened to him. Okay? It doesn't matter. What's happening to him is happening to him for a reason. What's that reason? Only God knows. Okay? But I guarantee you, God's not capricious. He doesn't just say, oh, I think I'm going to pick on Job today. That'd be fun. He's not capricious. He's not whimsical. He's not like one of those gods that you see in movies about Greek mythology or Roman mythology, where they're up on Mount Olympus and they're playing chess with your lives, and having a good time. That's not God. That's a human idea of God that's false. But God's not capricious. So anything that happens, I can guarantee you, God is working through it. Okay, whether you perceive it as good or bad, all right? Whether you perceive it as good or bad, I'm sure that all of us here can look at our lives and see things that happen to us that at the time were very unpleasant, but through which we learned a great lesson. Okay, that we learned something about ourselves, or we learned something about life, or we learned something about the world. All of us have those experiences that we learn huge amounts of things through difficult times and difficult situations. And that's exactly what God is doing with Job here, is He's opening a whole new world of understanding to him and a whole depth of theology that Job had not previously had. Because guess what? We're lazy. We are very lazy beings. And we tend not to grow unless we're forced to. Okay? We're happy just kind of hanging out where we are and never really doing any serious growth until God says, no, it's time for you to grow. Okay, here we go. Here's the fertilizer. And you know what fertilizer is made out of, right? Okay, that's the stuff that gets dumped into your life. Here's the fertilizer, and it's going to help you grow. Okay? Finally, Job will come to the point you'll see him simply rely on God. Okay, and that's where we want to get in our suffering. We want to get in our suffering from a point of saying, why me? Why is this happening to me? What did I do to deserve this? To sitting in the lap of God and saying, okay, Lord, here I am. I'm going to keep my hands and feet inside the right at all times and keep the lap bar firmly in place. And here we go. And I'm going to try to figure out what I can figure out from this. In the midst of suffering, and the suffering that Satan brought upon him, right? God didn't have anything to do with that. That was all Satan. So, and that's another thing we talked about. God never wills evil, not God only wills good. Satan always wills evil. Okay, remember that. That's what he does for a living. He loves his work. He always wills evil. So God is always confounding Satan in our lives. Every time we go through a time of hardship, a time of trial, and come out the other side stronger Christians and more powerful Christians, Satan has been confounded and God has won again, over and over and over again. It's a sad. There are times when somebody abandons God, and that's sad. It is always our privilege to abandon God. Always our privilege to reject him. It's the only power we have over God. God has all the power in our lives except the power to reject him. Okay. Remember, I've used the analogy before. If this is grace and this is faith, that faith is the hand that holds on to grace. So when you became Christian, whether that was through the word or through holy baptism, grace was put into your hand of faith. The hand of faith was created. Grace is put into it. There you go. Okay. You possess grace by faith. That's what we mean by grace by faith. Okay. Your only power is to reject it. Okay. You can't accept Jesus. Okay. If you get that language out of your vocabulary, if you have it there, you can't accept Jesus. Okay. And if people ever ask you if you found Jesus, you can say, no, I certainly haven't. He found me. Okay. He found me and he created faith in me. And then he placed his grace, the death he died on the cross and suffered for me, firmly into my life and gave me salvation. He found me. Okay. All right. So, let's pause just a minute to see if there's any questions. Okay. Not seeing any questions come through. So let's move on with Job 16. I'm going to read just a paragraph out of this book about this section. There may be times in our lives when we think or feel that God treats us unfairly. What in the world do we do with those thoughts and feelings? Okay, well, first of all, you know what I say about feelings, right? How can we bring ourselves to pray to God when we think he's got something against us, especially when bad times hit? In other words, how do we pray when we are suffering? That's what we'll explore in this session of our study of Job. Although Job did not always comprehend God and his ways, we will discover that God welcomes, even encourages prayers with spunk. Okay? God welcomes and even encourages prayers with spunk. So let's look at Job. Well, before I get started, just to say, I know Job complains a lot. If you're a person who gets frustrated with complainers, sometimes Job is a little difficult to read because, especially in the early chapters, he does a lot of complaining. I mean, you can't blame him, but sometimes we get sick of complaining. My question, though, to you to think about is complaint an appropriate prayer? Okay, is complaint an appropriate prayer? There are people, who will say, "Well, I don't want to complain to God. I don't want to complain. That's just not." Read the Psalms. Okay, take a gander through the Psalms and see how many Psalms are Psalms of complaint. People complaining to God. Okay, we have a nicer word, the complaint, for them. We call them laments. Yeah, because lament sounds nicer than complaint. We even have a whole book of the Bible called Lamentations, right? A whole book of the Bible. So complaining is an appropriate prayer. It's fine to complain to God, and God promises to hear us. When people say, that you shouldn't bother God with that, or that you shouldn't be complaining to God. What I say is that if their God, if you can't complain to their God, then their God is way too small. Yeah, I don't want a small God. If my God can't take a little complaining, if he can't take some irritated praying from me, if he can't take some criticism, okay, whether it's justified or not, then he's too small a God. All right. I often remind people who are having trouble with their teenagers that their teenagers are teenagers and they are adults. I don't let them off the hook. In fact, I even had one parent tell me that they didn't want to come see me because all I do is defend the kids. Right? Because they're kids. Yeah, they're the ones who need defending. You're the adult. Act like it. Okay? If you became a parent to get appreciated, then you went into the wrong line of business. Okay? You don't do it for appreciation. You do it because you want to serve God by raising a person up in faith in Him. I mean, it's the purest form of evangelism, right? You never get the only time you really get to have a tabula rasa, a blank slate, is when you get to take a kid, a baby, and you get to take a baby and you get to raise that baby up. That is evangelism from the very start. It's probably, in some ways, the easiest evangelism because you're not undoing anybody else's garbage. But in other ways, it's the hardest evangelism because it goes on forever. Okay, it never ends. I used to always, when my kids were teenagers, I would look at Dave Breschuk and I would say, "It's over at 21, right?" And he would just laugh. He would just giggle, when I would say that, because all of his kids are, 10 to 20 years older than my kids. And so, he would just giggle. Parenting never ends. It never stops. You are the evangelist in that child's life for that child's whole life. Okay? You are a lifetime evangelist. So in that way, it's the hardest kind of evangelism. It's not like, going to Africa and preaching the word and then moving on to the next village. That's easy compared to parenting. Parenting is a lifetime job of evangelism. Where was I going with that? Evangelism, parenting, defending the parent. I don't remember where I was even going with that now. But the point is if you can't complain to God, if God needs a human being to defend him, then he's way too small a God for me. I don't want him. So it's okay. It's okay to complain to God. It's okay to be angry with God. God's a big boy. He can handle your anger. Okay. I know where I was going with that. It's okay. It's as a parent, as a parent of a child, it's okay for the child to be angry with the parent. It's okay for the child to be frustrated with the parent. Okay. That's fine. That's part of it. Okay. The parent has to grow up and get over that. And can't get hurt feelings every time the child's angry with them, or else you'll be a lousy parent. Because if you back down every time the child's angry, or you change direction every time the child disagrees, then that poor child is going to be, Jude talks about a person being double-minded, and how it causes indecision and causes the instability in the life. The instability in the life of a child is caused by that double-mindedness. It's hard as a parent to remain steadfast and stalwart and do what you think is right, even in the face of criticism, even in the face of judgment, even in the face of complaining. Okay? But we get that from God. Okay? That's how you get the strength to do that, is from God, because God is the absolute perfect parent. He is never moving. Well, first of all, he's always right, so that makes it a little easier. He never has to worry about being wrong. That's always the parent's concern. Is it, what if I'm making a stand here and I'm wrong? But God never has to worry about that because he's God. Okay, Job 16, 1 through 5. Then Job answered and said, remember his friends have been talking again. Let's see, right before that, trying to remember, Eliphaz. Yeah, Eliphaz in 15 had just finished talking. And so Job says, I have heard many such things. Miserable comforters, miserable comforters are you all. Miserable comforters are you all. Shall windy words have an end? I like that, windy words. Or what provokes you that you answer? I also could speak as you do if you were in my place. I could join words together against you and shake my head at you. I could strengthen you with my mouth, and the solace of my lips would assuage your pain. Okay? So Job's basically saying, look, I'm hurting. I don't need criticism and judgment. I need solace. Okay? I need solace. And they keep on insisting, of course, that Job must have done something wrong. But here, Job kind of digs in and says, no, this is not what I've done wrong. This is I'm suffering. 16, 6 through 22. I'm just going to read through this because this is, and I want you to pay attention as I read this. Pay attention to how Job feels. He's really expressing how he feels about the whole thing here. He says, if I speak, my pain is not assuaged. And if I forbear, how much of it leaves me? Surely now God has worn me out. He has made desolate all my company. He has shriveled me up, which is a witness against me. And my leanness has risen up against me. It testifies to my face. He has torn me in his wrath and hated me. He has gnashed his teeth at me. My adversary sharpens his eyes against me. Men have gaped at me with their mouths. They have struck me insolently on the cheek. They mass themselves together against me. God gives me up to the ungodly and casts me into the hands of the wicked. I was at ease and he broke me apart. He seized me by the neck and dashed me to pieces. He set me up as his target. His archers surround me. He slashes open my kidneys and does not spare. He pours out my gall on the ground. He breaks me with breach upon breach. He runs upon me like a warrior. I have sewed sackcloth upon my skin and have laid my strength in the dust. My face is red from weeping, and on my eyelids is deep darkness, although there is no violence in my hands, and my prayer is pure. O earth, cover not my blood, and let my cry find no resting place. Even now, behold, my witness is in heaven, and he who testifies for me is on high. My friends scorn me. My eye pours out tears to God, that he would argue the case of a man with God, as a son of man does with his neighbor. For when a few years have come, I shall go the way from which I shall not return. Okay, that's Job kind of pouring out his heart here to God and saying, there's nothing I can do. There's no reasoning to this. There's no sense to this. There's nothing I can do here. And listen to what he says in 19. Even now, behold, my witness is in heaven, and he who testifies for me is on high. Interesting, right? My witness is in heaven. He calls God to be his witness and to give him justice. He's not asking for mercy. Okay? He's not asking for mercy. He doesn't want mercy because there's nothing he's done to deserve this. That's his point. Okay? I made the correct sacrifices. It's not that I'm not a sinner, but I followed the rules that you gave. I made the correct sacrifices, and yet my children are dead. All my money is gone. My house is destroyed. My animals are destroyed. My wife is a snot and is basically gone. She's emotionally abandoning me because her last words to him were "curse God and die." And so he says, "I haven't deserved any of that. I want justice." Interesting, because one of the things we learn here from Job is that we should call God to be who he is. Okay? God likes that. God likes it when we call him to be who he is. He promises to be just. He also promises to be merciful. But Job says, I'm not asking for mercy. God didn't do anything. I want justice. Because this is unjust. What I am suffering is unjust. Very interesting. He believes that his suffering at this point is God's will. Okay, he's assuming that his suffering is God's will, and so he wants God to be his witness that he has not done anything wrong for which he's not atoned, but through sacrifice, and therefore it's unjust. Okay, remember that you and I are privy to the throne room of heaven. We're told the backstory of what's going on here with Satan, but Job hasn't been told any of this. Okay, Job doesn't know any of this. That God is allowing Satan to toy with him. Okay, it's interesting that Job calls for an arbiter in elsewhere. If you look back in chapter 9, when you have a chance, look back through chapter 9, and you'll see him then. He's calling for an arbiter or a mediator. Job recognizes that he needs somebody bigger than him, and certainly bigger than Bildad and Eliphaz and the other one, whose name I can't remember right now. Zophar. He certainly needs something bigger than them, because they're no help at all. They're speaking windy words. I like that. I'm going to remember that and use that from now on. When people are telling me things that don't make any sense, that they're speaking windy words. I think I can use that at pastors' conferences a lot. So did Job get his wish? That's what I want you to think about. And I'm going to give a minute for questions here in just a second. In fact, start typing your questions, because I'm going to break for it here in just a second. Did Job get his wish for a witness between him and God, for an arbiter, for a mediator, an intermediary between man and God? Think about that. Did Job get his wish? Questions? Comments? Deep thoughts? Personal testimonies of the Holy Spirit? Just kidding on the last one. I don't want to hear your personal testimonies of the Holy Spirit. Not online. Job's wife is not a godly woman. Did they divorce? No, they went to marriage therapy, and the marriage therapist did a wonderful job and fixed it all up. I don't know, Danya. No, they didn't divorce, because she's still around at the end of the book. So I guess they got back together, and he had more children with her. So I guess they fixed it. Judy or Dave. Dave says, gives the Sunday school answer, Jesus. And in this case, yeah, it's exactly who it is. It's Jesus. He was the mediator. Jamie says, why does he let Satan mess with him? I digress. Why does God let Satan mess with Job? Well, you can surmise whatever you want. We're not really told the why, like many things with God. Is he doesn't bother telling us why, probably because our brains are too infinitesimal to figure it out anyway, to understand it anyway. But for some reason, yeah, God allowed Satan to mess with him. We can also assume that maybe God lets Satan mess with us sometimes too. I assume, because I know God's will is always good, I assume is to teach us something. Okay, to either teach us something about ourselves, to teach someone else something about him, to do something, okay, something good, because he's always going to do it good. Yeah, and obviously, yes, Vicky mentions that, yes, that Jesus, the comment already went past, but that Jesus is our one mediator, and that's absolutely right. Looking back at your parenting discussion reminds me of the father in the parable of the prodigal son. Yeah, kind of, yeah. The father and prodigal son, interesting. The father understood right from the beginning which son was lost. Okay, I always like that, because he went. It says that he went looking for his son. He never went looking for the son who was sleeping with pigs and eating with pigs and working with pigs. He went looking for the older son. who wasn't at the party, when his brother was being welcomed home. He understood which son was lost. It was the one who was so wrapped up in himself that he couldn't see beyond his own desires and his own needs. Yeah. So Job did get his wish. He got Jesus, and of course, we I was going to talk about this later, but we'll talk about it in just a minute now. There's a thing in theology called typology. Okay, typology, 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 and we talk about people in the Old Testament being types of Christ. Okay, in other words, they carry certain elements that foreshadow Christ, right? And so Job is a type of Christ. And in his complaint here that we just read, you hear him talk about things that happened to Christ. They have struck me insolently on the cheek. And of course, Christ was struck insolently. They massed themselves together against me. They gnashed their teeth at me. And we're told that people wagged their heads and gnashed their teeth, which were Jewish ways of showing disapproval. It was a cultural thing. At Christ on the cross. So Job is a type of Christ. Other types of Christ are Isaac, right? Why is Isaac a type of Christ? Remember, he's going to be sacrificed, right? Abraham says, sacrifice your son. God says, Abraham, sacrifice your son. And Abraham says, okay, God. And he takes Isaac up on the mountain to sacrifice him. And then right before the sacrifice, the angel of the Lord comes and stops him, and there's a ram caught by his horns by a crown of thorns. Okay, so Isaac is a type of Christ, the sacrifice for the other sins. King David is a type of Christ. He is a king of his people, a mighty king, as Jesus was a mighty king. Obviously, none of the types of Christ measure up to Jesus. None of them are God. But they're all little foreshadowings in the Old Testament of what the Christ is going to be like. Hosea is one of the great types of Christ. Hosea is called to marry a prostitute, and then she has children by another man, like some of her Johns at the temple. And then God says, and of course Hosea divorces her rightly, and God says, no, take her back. Yeah, take her back, just the way I take back my people. Okay, take her back just the way I take back my people. And so Jesus is on the cross, nails driven through his hands and feet, crown of thorns shoved down on his head, his back ripped open by floggings, rubbing up against a rough cross, dying of thirst, dying of blood loss. And his first word from the cross is what? Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Just like Hosea took Gomer back, Jesus takes us back, regardless of what we have done to him in our sin. Okay, let's look at Job 17. My spirit is broken, my days are extinct, the graveyard is ready for me. Surely there are mockers about me, and my eye dwells on their provocation. Okay, mockers they're a crowd gathered to watch Job fall. Apparently, people have gathered around him, sitting there in the dirt, wearing his sackcloth with boils all over his skin. And apparently there's other people there besides the three friends who we hear from. It reminds us certainly of the crowds jeering at Christ on Good Friday, right? And it makes me question, why do people, and this is sort of just a rhetorical question, I'm not really looking for answers because it's just a sort of an opinion thing, but why do people so enjoy it when righteous people fall? Human beings just love it when somebody who is seen as a righteous or holy person screws up. Okay, rather than be sad and say, "Oh man, of all the people, it's sad that he made this mistake and that he sinned this way." Recognizing that everybody sins, everybody does stupid stuff, everybody says stupid stuff, nobody's perfect. But rather than saying, "Oh, I'm so sad," people lap it up. They just love it. Let me tell you, Pastors are very aware of this. There's always a group of people ready to cheer when a pastor screws up, just thrilled. And somehow it makes people feel more righteous, more holy. It vindicates them somehow that they're okay because that pastor screwed up. One of the interesting things in church history has been that nobody really saw that divorced clergy would be so popular. People used to think that if you were divorced as a clergy person, well, at one time, of course, if you got divorced as a clergy person, you had to leave the ministry. You weren't allowed to stay in. Then the thought was that they would give them a chance, but no one would really ever want to call them because nobody's going to want a divorced pastor. Turns out they're really popular. Pastors who have some kind of public sin in their lives are often really popular because people like it. When the person who is supposed to be the symbol for holiness and righteousness, okay, this is the person who stands in front of the congregation and says, I'm in the stead, in the place of Jesus Christ himself, which is what I am. Okay, Christ has put me as his representative at Trinity Lutheran Church. Okay, and people like it when that person is proven fallible. It turns out people enjoy it, and this is what we're seeing here in Job, is that Job was a very holy man by God's own words, right? By God's own words in the first chapter, he was a righteous man, and people are excited that he's having all of this suffering and that he's complaining to God and he's having all of this lamenting going on. People love it. Job in verse 3 of chapter 17, lay down a pledge for me with you. Who is there who will put up security for me? Job's asking God to be the witness that he needs to mediate for him. And of course, that's exactly what God did, right? In Jesus. Job understood that only being righteous and holy enough to mediate between us and God was indeed God himself. Okay? That's the only place. Job figured it out. Long before Jesus ever came, Job had figured it out. The only one who could be righteous and holy enough to mediate from me to God is God. Okay? And that's exactly what Job just got. Verse 4, since you have closed their hearts to understanding, therefore you will not let them triumph. He's talking about the mockers there. And he says, this is a really weird verse in verse 5. He who informs against his friends to get a share of their property, the eyes of his children will fail. We have no idea what that really means. Apparently it was some kind of popular proverb at the time that means the mockers will get theirs. Job is convinced that whatever happens, God will see to it that the mockers get what they have coming to them. Let's see, verse 6, he has made me a byword of the peoples, and I am one before whom men spit. My eye has grown dim from vexation, and all my members are like a shadow. The idea of the eye growing dim from vexation is because in those times, it was believed that there was a light behind your eye. Okay, that's how people could see, is because there was a light back there that was and the brighter the light, the better you could see. I'm sure that came from people seeing the reflection of fire or light in eyes at night, and rather than they didn't understand the process necessarily of the reflection or the reflectivity of the eyes, or maybe even it came from animals, who have even more reflectivity of eyes. But that's what it came from, is the idea that they thought there was a fire. So Job thinks that he's saying his fire's going out. The upright are appalled at this, and the innocent stirs himself up against the godless. Yet the righteous holds to his way. Pay attention. And he who has clean hands grows stronger and stronger. Every once in a while, you get these little pieces from Job in the midst of his complaining and whining. He knows the right answer. He knows that if you are a righteous and holy man, you hang on to that and you maintain your beliefs. I'm going to ask for questions here in just a minute. So get ready to type your questions if you have them, or go ahead and start typing your questions if you have them. That last verse, yet the righteous holds to his way, should encourage us. When we have made a decision, when we have made a stand of some sort, we ask the question of the Word of God. Because remember, please remember that when you pray to God, you are talking, not listening. It's good to pray to God. It's good for you to tell God what you want to tell him. It's good for you to express your feelings and all things to him. But you're not listening to him. When you read the Word of God, when you come to worship, when you hear the readings read, when you hear the sermon preached, when you hear the Bible study taught, that's when you're hearing the Word of God, right? So, so when you make your stand, you have to listen, you have to read, you have to think, and ask God, is this righteous? Is this right? And if you are convinced from God that you are making the correct stand, then dig in and hold on, okay? Because that's what the righteous man does. He holds his way, and he who has clean hands grows stronger and stronger. Okay, questions? Okay, I'm not seeing anything, so I'm going to go ahead. We have a few minutes here. Let's see if we can knock out chapter 18. It's not tough. I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's more. Remember, I told you the word Bildaddery. You know, Bildaddery is whenever Bildad speaks, and it's usually irritating. And so Bildad the Shuhite's going to hold forth again here for why, I'm looking at why punish Job's children? That's another one of those meaningless and irrelevant questions that we ask. Anytime we speak of God and we say why, it's generally a meaningless and irrelevant question. So you can usually figure that out because we don't know. We don't know. We're not in the position to ask God why. God allowed Satan to punish Job by killing his children. We don't know why. We know it's good because God did it. So God allowed it, so it's good. He'll turn it for good. The kids will go to heaven. I mean, everything will be fine. But that's not a question we can answer. Another question here is, often when we make a right decision, a strength and peace comes over us. Yeah, I think that's true. Is that very often there's a certain peace that we get when the decision is right. And I think the peace comes not from the decision being right, but from the Word of God. Because typically when we've made a right decision, in fact, every time we've made a right decision, it's because we've consulted the Word of God. And we have immersed ourselves in the Word, and the Word gives us the peace and the strength to hang on to it. Okay, it's not really our decision that gives us the peace, it's the Word. Okay? So Bildad, moving on to Bildad here. Bildad, remember, I'm going to let you read 18 on your own, but you can just know that Bildad is all about law. For Bildad, if you suffer, it's your own fault. And in fact, he even suggests it's Job's kids' fault, that they probably did something. I like that idea. I like the idea of all my suffering being my children's fault. I could, that's good. That's a good thing to live with, and I don't ever have to think about my own choices because I can just blame my kids. It was all their fault. So Bildad says you just need to pull yourself up by the bootstraps, and you need to figure out what you did wrong and move on. Just to give a reminder, Eliphaz is the one who thinks that he has some kind of secret revelation. Okay, so he's had a dream. Anytime someone says I had a dream, unless it's Martin Luther King Jr., then you can dismiss it. Because most people's dreams, why does God need to communicate through dreams? Okay? Anytime somebody tells me that, I had a dream, I think God was telling me this. I don't care. Why does God have to talk to you through your dreams? He gave you the Bible. Yeah, you got a 1,200-page document there to tell you everything God wants to tell you. He doesn't need to tell you through dreams. And if he tells you through dreams, okay, fine. But you still have to back it up from the Bible. So I don't want to do a two-step process when there's only one step necessary. Okay? So Eliphaz is having a dream, and he has secret revelation. Bildad is basically saying it must have been your kids. It was probably your kids. And then Zophar is the one who comes in and says, hey, God is too great to answer a miserable worm like you. God's angry with you, and it's none of your business why. So Bildad goes on in chapter 18 to talk about he believes that the moral order of things and the natural order of things are intimately connected. So moral order, natural order, intimately connected, and A and B always equal C. So if you suffer, then someone in your family has sinned. That's A and B has to equal C. Okay? So the answer is just pray for forgiveness for the sin that you have obviously committed, right? All you have to do is pray for forgiveness for the sin that you've obviously committed, and everything will be fine. Okay? Problem with that idea is Job hasn't sinned. Okay? And for whatever he's sinned, he's done the proper atonement. So, that's a weighty thing to put on Job. How long, Bildad says, how long will you hunt for words? Consider, and then we will speak. Why are we counted as cattle? Why are we stupid in your sight? You who tear yourself in your anger, shall the earth be forsaken for you, or the rock be removed out of its place? Indeed, the light of the wicked is put out, and the flame of his fire does not shine. It's very clear to Bildad. If you're suffering, you've been wicked. Pray for forgiveness. To Bildad, we want to remember Matthew 9. And I'm going to go to Matthew 9 here real quick and read that section for you. Matthew 9, Jesus is speaking in verse 12. Actually, I'm going to start at 10. This is Matthew 9, beginning at verse 10. And as Jesus reclined at table in the house, behold, many tax collectors and sinners came and were reclining with Jesus and his disciples. And when the Pharisees saw this, they said to his disciples, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? See, that's Bildadery. Okay? That the Pharisees love Bildad. If you want to be a righteous person, you don't hang out with tax collectors and sinners. Okay? You get those people out of your life, because you become a righteous person by obeying all the rules. Okay, that's how you get to be a righteous person. Your whole concept of righteousness is based on rule keeping. When Jesus heard them say this, when he heard it, he said to them, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. For I came not to call the righteous, but sinners." Okay? If you believe that you have kept all the rules, if you believe that your righteousness is based on how well you keep the rules, or if you believe that anyone's righteousness is based on how well they keep the rules, then you're missing the point. Okay? Then you don't believe that you're sick or that you need a physician. The only way you want Jesus in your life is if you believe you need him. If you don't believe you need him, you wouldn't want him. And Jesus isn't one who comes in and kicks down the door and forces his way in. If you don't want him, okay, then he won't force his way into your life. And so he says he doesn't argue with the Pharisees, just as he wouldn't argue with Bildad. He doesn't say, "No, you guys are sinners. Don't you guys understand what a sinner you are?" You almost never see that with Jesus, with people. Remember the woman caught in adultery, and they're going to stone her, And Jesus walks up and says, "Let him without sin cast the first stone." And they all said, "Oh man, Lord, you spoil all the fun." And they threw their rocks down and walked off. And then Jesus looks at the woman and says, "Woman, where are your accusers?" And she says, "Then they've all gone." He says, "Then neither do I accuse you. Go and sin no more." Yeah, that's Jesus. Jesus is there to forgive. He's not there to be a hall monitor. Too many Christians in this world think that they're hall monitors. They run around, they're busybodies. They run around and try to monitor everybody's behavior. And they're very quick to tell everyone who's doing what wrong and who's doing what right and what they should do about it. They're busybodies and they're Pharisees and they're Bildads. We have to keep that out of ourselves because it's a human nature thing. If we let our guard down, Bildad, the Pharisee, will be right there to step into our lives so that we can run around and be hall monitors and keep track of what everybody's doing right and what everybody's doing wrong instead of loving and forgiving people, which is what Jesus did. Jesus' model was love and forgiveness. Always love and forgiveness, love and forgiveness, love and forgiveness. All right. Next week, we will gather together again and same time, same place, same channel. And we will pick up at chapter 19. Chapter 19. And so do please read at least chapter 19 for next week. Because it'll be a lot more meaningful to you if you've had a read of it first. I'll give you a hint. It's the text for one of the most famous Easter hymns and funeral hymns that we have. It's every Easter, and I bet you every other funeral you'll hear this hymn. It's from chapter 19 in Job. All right, let's close with the blessing. The Lord bless us and keep us. The Lord make his face shine upon us and be gracious unto us. The Lord lift up his countenance upon us and give us peace. Good night and God bless.